July 19th, 2023. Well, we're back to the situation that's occurred over in the Ukraine-Russia war. The Ukrainians managed to carry out another attack on the Kersh bridge, and it looks, I guess this time with some kind of robotic boats or something of this sort. That's a little unclear. Pretty strong explosion, but they missed the target. They knocked out a piece of the passenger traffic lane, but they failed to get the railroad, which is the real strategic target. So I guess you could say on this one the Russians sort of lucked out, given that the attack did get through the outer whatever defenses they had. On the other hand, Ukraine is now getting some pretty significant bombardments around the port area of Odessa, I think, which is connected with the Russian desire to, I bet, probably limit the shipment of grain out of Ukraine. The exact motivations are a little unclear, probably just to put pressure on the world and maybe increase the price of the grain that they're shipping. At any rate, as I say, this is a nasty conflict, so things like this are going on. So anyhow, I'm kind of asking, was this really worth it to take that level of punishment over blowing up a section of the bridge? Because there are other methods of transporting equipment to the battlefront, and if the Russians aren't completely incompetent, they would have to look at the possibility of losing that bridge, I think, in their worst case scenario planning. I mean, obviously they'd be better off with the bridge, but at any rate, that got the whole thing going, and so we can kind of look at that as just another strike in the whole issue. Otherwise, of course, we've completed the end of over 6 weeks of Ukrainian offensive, if you count the July the 4th Sunday as being the beginning, which I think most people do. And really not a whole lot has been gained by the Ukrainians since the last week. I think a little bit here and a little bit there, and a little loss over here and a little loss over there. And in fact, what seems to have happened in the last week is the beginning of a Russian counteroffensive, particularly in the northeastern regions that are south of Kharkiv and well north of Bakhmut up there. In those northeastern regions, there does seem to be an ongoing offensive. From just studying the various videos I monitor, which go into detailed battle mapping and things that are going on. But if you like these videos, please give me a like, and of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd appreciate it. And of course, you can forward links to anybody that might be interested. So yeah, that seems to be the situation: is the movement from the Russians having kind of a static defense approach. Well, not static, but I mean pretty much staying on the defensive and allowing the Ukrainians to expend their forces against the wall that they put up, and with occasional counterattacks to recover positions that are lost, to a strategy of out-and-out offensive in the north. Apparently they've accumulated, I mentioned in some earlier videos that it looked like there was a couple of armored divisions up in that northern area. Apparently even Ukrainian sources suggest there's about 900 Russian tanks and 100,000 men, a bunch of artillery and everything else concentrated there, and they're beginning to move forward. They've made small penetrations, some of them across the bridgeheads, and others a little bit deeper penetration towards certain towns and so forth. None of it's massive. It's certainly not fast-moving offensive. It's sort of like the Ukrainian offensives are. They're slow and grinding ahead, although by waiting until the Ukraine had concentrated its forces primarily in the southern offensive in Zaporizhia, by attacking as far away from that as possible, obviously the bulk of Ukrainian forces are not immediately available to deal with the situation. And also another penetration a little further south of there has already attracted a pretty substantial amount of their forces to hold it at bay, including 3 artillery brigades. So it's pretty. And then then Ukraine has its own sights on taking Bakhmut back, and so that'll put some pressure on them to make a decision of where to commit their remaining reserves. And the idea, I think, is just to spread everything thin, and maybe the Russians hope to gain some ground. at which they might. The danger for them, obviously, as soon as they actually move on the offensive, they'll expose themselves to artillery fire. And remember, we got these new cluster munitions coming in, and I think the cluster munitions are most effective against aggressive or forward-moving forces that are in the open. Those that are hunkered down in bunkers and well-created zigzag trenches, it's not nearly as effective there. Now, granted, if a bomblet does fall in a section of a trench, just like throwing a grenade in the trench, but if it won't affect the people in the trench that's on the other side of the zigzag, whereas a unitary 155 millimeter shell that hits spot on might do a lot more overpressure damage to people. So anyway, that's kind of the situation there, and we'll just have to kind of again wait to see. But there's not a lot to report. There was this major general that was commanding a front in the Zaporizhzhia area who apparently quit and put out a nasty gram to the high command. And there's a bunch of other people have been relieved. In fact, it seems to have been happening slowly, not all at once. General Solovykin is still, we're still don't know what happened to him and why. I mean, since he seemed, I mean, it doesn't seem like he was for the Wagner revolt, and yet he seems to be punished for it. Perhaps, as I've said previously, I think one of his charters might be to keep control of Prigozhin, and maybe he's being punished for failure to do that rather than for any active measure. But anyhow, we don't know where he is. Apparently, he's no longer in command of any part of the front at the moment, and some other subordinate, or I think some colonel general from their paratrooper force has taken over. I think it's possible that what may be going on. I mean, there's being everything that happens is being played up in the Western media as like big disaster for them. But if you look back at World War II, the U.S. relieved a lot of division commanders in World War II, and we were, of course, winning the war. So, and so it's possible that what's going on here is just a difference in philosophy, and maybe a difference in the phase of the operation, even because, I mean, maybe they were wanting to put generals in that were pretty good on the defensive during the period from, let's say, late last October until maybe fairly recently. And now maybe they want to go over to the offensive, and so they want people with a slightly different skill set and a different attitude to take over at this current period. We'll just have to see how that plays. I do think that one question we ought to ask ourselves, in the aftermath of the NATO summit and everything, is looking back on this whole process since February of last year. Have we really done the Ukrainians any real favor? I mean, seriously? I mean, Ukraine was last February, before the Russian invasion, was an intact country, was a lot more populous, definitely had a much better lifestyle. A lot of the people that are now dead or maimed weren't dead and weren't maimed. And what are they really fighting for, fundamentally? They're basically fighting to get back Crimea. I mean, after all, Crimea is a primarily Russian ethnic area, and I just found out recently that, in fact, it was a self-governing sub-region of Ukraine prior to the coup in 2014, and that, in fact, that even Western polling of that area before the coup showed that the majority of people there were pretty much happy to be, with Russia. I mean, in other words, this is not a case of, you're dealing with a situation where we had a country that was part of a large nation state, the former Soviet Union, with 15 separate republics in it. And during that time, those many decades, people moved around in there, and some of these borders were kind of arbitrarily set up by the Soviet Union anyhow. And so why is that considered by the West and our leadership a sacred set of lines when we didn't consider the boundaries of Ukraine to be sacred back in the 1990s. Remember how that was broken up and a civil war waged, and a lot of people were killed and atrocities committed in Yugoslavia between Serbia and Croatia and Kosovo and so forth, right? So the same thing is kind of true here. And instead of negotiating with the Russians prior to this invasion, we totally ignored their position, totally rejected it, and encouraged Ukraine to stand fast, and then basically dared Russia to attack, and finally they did. And while I could argue that, well, they shouldn't have done it, but we have to, ask, you kind of, provoke a known predator, it's liable to attack you, right? I mean, play with a venomous snake, you might get bit. And the question is, if you can't afford to kill the venomous snake because the snake would kill you back when you do it, given the nuclear balance, wouldn't it be better to have just not done this and negotiated something and stayed with the Minsk Accords, let Russia have Crimea, and then in return for a guarantee they'd leave the rest of Ukraine alone? That's what I still think this is looking more and more the case, and just how many more Ukrainians have to die in this thing. I mean, this offensive doesn't seem to be gaining the goals they wanted. It's just getting a lot of people on both sides killed, a lot of money being wasted, and a lot more. I mean, village after village is being fought over. When you look at what they're getting, it's just rubble. I mean, so anyway, it's just kind of my thought on the subject there, that I don't know that we're really doing Ukraine any favor here, but by the policies we've had. I mean, we've definitely discouraged them from negotiating, and of course that definitely happened in the early days of the conflict, And there's a lot of dispute over what the Russians' original intention was. You have like Colonel McGregor's viewpoints, and of course we have the mainstream, U.S. State Department official viewpoint. My thought is that probably McGregor may be wrong in that they probably thought they could just roll them, but just going in there and it would collapse and they could take over. At the time, I still thought they'd be stuck with an endless guerrilla war. People like McGregor think that they just wanted to put pressure on them to negotiate for the terms that they wanted, which were relatively modest by comparison to the idea of conquering Ukraine. It was just, again, Crimea and the Minsk Accords with respect to the Donbass. And that might be the case, or it might not be. But at any rate, it does seem like that we didn't handle this thing in a way that was, helpful to Ukrainian people, in my opinion. I mean, like 8 million of them are basically refugees at this point. It just doesn't seem to have worked out too good. But anyhow, so that's kind of what I think about it. And so anyway, enough of that for now. Of course, we're having an ongoing situation domestically here. The cocaine gate is still continuing, I guess. But I guess we now know that the news came out that the investigators have destroyed the evidence. So any hope of really getting valid fingerprints or DNA evidence off the package they found is kind of moot. And so that's they destroyed the evidence. Great. The Biden administration is downright criminal. I mean, pure and simple criminal. And I just have to say that. The other thing, I guess, is that the word is that Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, is apparently on the verge of indicting Trump again in D.C. on some kind of offenses he's concocted related to the January 6th issue or the election challenges. And of course, 6 of the 16 people that had signed the alternative elector type statements, or whatever you want to call them, in Michigan are going to be, I guess, indicted by the Democrats there. The ongoing Democrat persecution continues, and well, it is what it is. But hopefully, we can win the election and get some freedom for these people. The fact of the matter is, the Democrats have done the same thing in previous issues, so it isn't unthinkable that, I mean, my thought on that was these were not fraudulent petitions; they were alternatives, meaning that if a legal authority had reversed the election, then they would have the votes to present their case. But in fact, no legal authority was really going to do that. But I think that turning this into a criminal offense to me is just more of the kind of future the Democrat Party has in mind for the United States, and it's not a free country that they want. At any rate, I'll be wrapping this up for now, and as usual, of course, I'll post this on the Rumble as well, and we will, of course, I have the links to my social media accounts in the description below, and you can kind of follow them on a variety of topics I'm addressing, including the ones on the upcoming UAP conference. I guess there's going to be a hearing, as I understand, before the Oversight Committee of the House next Wednesday on the 26th, I think. So that's something else to be looking forward to. So all for now.